US House of Appropriations Committee have come up with something which is probably not too good news for the uranium juniors in the US. What did you make of it?
Yeah, look, I think it'd be just pretty discouraging for some of those companies that have really pushed the Section 232 process and were hoping to obtain shorter term benefits. So for the viewers out there, the House Appropriations Committee, whose job it is to take the recommended budget proposals, mark them up and then submit them to Congress for approval. That's for the budget commencing in October 2020. They jettisoned really the proposed US Uranium Fund. So if we go back for a moment to the report that came out of the Nuclear Fuel Working Group, which came out of the Section 232 investigation all those months ago, the report recommended a $150 million per annum uranium reserve that would acquire between 17 and 19 million pounds over about 10 years, and also convert a proportion of those so that the US could improve and enhance its stockpiling capability. At the moment, the US Department of Energy maintains only enough strategic reserves for about 7 reactor refills, reloads, and that was seen as not enough. Now, what's happened is the House Appropriations Committee says, nope, we're not going to fund that. We're not going to approve that. And they cited a lack of detail, in fact, from the Department of Energy over that. So they basically said, we're not too sure about the justification for this uranium reserve. And in fact, we didn't really get our questions answered on how it would be implemented, et cetera, et cetera. So a bit of a discouraging setback for many of those US producers. But of course, for the broader market, it's just really a blip.
Does it surprise you? Is this a shock to you?
No. I mean, in fact, you and I were talking about it. If it wasn't last week, it was the week before, where we were saying the DOE really seems to have its headspace in nuclear technologies, particularly SMRs and advanced reactor technology. When you look at where the money's going, most of the funding has gone to R&D for those different technologies. They can see how it can more directly benefit the US industrial complex, et cetera, et cetera. They did appear to be quite slow in getting their head around the nuclear fuel cycle during Section 232. And my impression, and we talked about this as well, was that the reserve looked a little bit like throwing a bone to the US mining industry. Quite an attractive bone if it had come off, of course, and that had been spread amongst only 2 or 3 of the miners. So it doesn't really surprise me to see this, given how distracted DOE has been and where its focus has been.
Okay, so given that, I mean, what's the timing on all of this? What happens next?
So the committee itself basically told DOE to go home and do its homework. What they asked for was they directed that the Department of Energy needs to come back with a plan, including costings, within 180 days of the Act passing. So they want them to tell the House Committee how they're going to go about procuring, converting, storing. They want information on the legal processes that allow them to do this type of thing, and all of the associated costings to that within 180 days. Now, that's obviously half a year from now, and presumably what would happen from there is that then gets tipped into next year's budget appropriations process. So my take on this and my read is that unless the Republicans pull a rabbit out of the hat in the Senate during this appropriations process, we're now looking at that money potentially being available from October 2021. So it's a long way off, and there's a long period of lobbying that's going to be required to see this one through from here.
I mean, if I'm a US uranium junior, I'm going to be pretty pissed because someone's dropped the ball here. They haven't done the homework. They haven't put in the hard yards to actually provide the information which was asked for. And I guess quite rightly, the committee's gone, no.
Well, I don't know where the breakdown has occurred. Honestly, I've got no idea. And there's a number of people who come on your show who probably would have some good insights as to that. It would definitely be disappointing for uranium juniors or uranium producers who are eyeing off this potential source of demand. The opportunity to contract directly with the US government would be very attractive to them. I'd look at it a bit more holistically though, which is the market is going to do the heavy lifting here anyway. By the time this all gets sorted out, the sort of numbers that they told the DOE that they would need in order to effectively resume production, the market's going to navigate and gravitate to those numbers anyway. I'll be astonished if in 2 or 3 years' time we're not above $60, $65 a pound on a term contracting basis. So it might be that when we finally get there and the US finally starts procuring this material from US production, the market has solved the problem for them in any case. And we now look back at all of these delays and this great long process that's certainly put a wet blanket and a dampener on a lot of the utility activity. We look back at all of this and say, well, what was that for?
Well, I'd agree with you, but again, we've had conversations probably back in the early days where we were trying to explain to people the importance of US utilities because it's such a big market. But the reality is 25% of the market, and the market will, we said at the time, would have to sort itself out. It looks like it's probably is going to have to do that. It is going to have to find its own pricing in the market because it's not getting much help from US politicians at the moment.
Yeah, and look, I think some would justifiably ask the question whether it's the US politicians' role to be helping in that instance. And that's a whole different discussion that really comes into what's philosophically the right level of government intervention and so forth. And there's a broad range of views on that, of course. But you're quite right. I mean, we know what supply and demand needs to do. And if utilities want to buy diverse supply from anyone except, say, the Kazakhs and the Russians, for example, well, they're going to have to be prepared to spend a proportion of their portfolio of contracts at those prices and above over the coming years.